Gradients were introduced to Blender 2.72, but ZeroBrush 1.5 does some really nice contextualization of these gradients. So for instance, if we click the gradient button, we'll see that the color palette changes to our gradient control, and it looks very smooth and understandable. And then we'll also see that this brush automatically switches to fill. And the reason for that is it really takes the fill brush in combination with the gradient tool to give you what you probably expected to happen. So say we're just painting on our basic little layer here, and we want to use a gradient. We click gradient, and then when we go to draw a line, we immediately create a gradient here. Now if we want to change the colors, you'll notice the little slider here to the left. And so this slider has a little white head on it and these little dashed lines, and that indicates that this is the selected slider, and this is the color that goes with that slider. So we have that selected, and we click on that, and we could change this to some random color, but probably what you want to do is use your predefined color palette. So you would click the eyedropper, and then select something from your color palette probably, and then select the other end of this, and then we would click this to change that color, and we would select our eyedropper again and probably select perhaps something that we had already predefined. And then so now when we go to create that gradient, we see a very kind of familiar type of gradient used. We can reverse this gradient by pressing this button here, which is nice. We can add more colors to the slider. You see that just added, and it's got the little white head and the little dashed lines, meaning, hey, I'm the active one. And we could change that color to something and bring this one closer. We can move these and create, interesting ramps of color. So if you want to do a radial gradient, you can come down here and change this to radial, but also if you select the line tool, it will do this kind of gradient, and then if you select the circle tool, it will do a radial gradient, which is what you're expecting to happen. So that's kind of my goal, is to make things that you expect to happen. And then if you want to use the default gradient of the draw brush, you click on the draw stroke button, and then when we start drawing, you'll see that the gradient, which it doesn't take the gradient from the fill brush, you have to reset this to whatever you want. But thankfully, since we've got these color palettes, even if we can't transfer the gradients, we can at least make them consistent with the same exact colors by using these palettes. You see, when we're using it on the draw brush, by default the gradient switches with pressure, so this is actually changing with the pressure of my tablet. If you're using a mouse, you probably won't see any change at all. You can switch this from pressure to repeat, which basically goes through this gambit of colors over time, and this gradient spacing really represents how much time is spent in between the gradient changing. So when I do it like this, it's very quick. I mean, it's not actually time, it is distance. If I stop, it's not changing, and when I move, it does, but effectively it's time. So if we bring this up really high, you'll see that this gradient takes much longer to go through the gambit and then restart. And then of course when we want to go back to the radial gradient, we can just click that button, and we've got this nice radial. And then the linear, we just click the line tool, and it does what we expect it to do, which is great. Now you can also set the alpha or transparency value of each one of these sliders, which you mostly need to do if you want to make gradients that you can see the effect of the gradients before it. Otherwise you're not really going to be able to see the effect of multiple gradients that you lie down, unless you're using different layers in ZeroBrush. And then of course when we're done with gradient, we just click to turn it off, and we're back in regular draw mode, which is super cool.